In this video, we want to talk about the changing business environment and employee relations. The concept of employee relations relies on a system which comprises of stakeholders. So when we talk about employee relations, we're really talking about various stakeholders, and there are many stakeholders within organizations. But to be more specific in our context, we're looking at employees and employers. But within organizations, of course, there are stakeholders such as suppliers of raw materials and the community in which the business is situated. The banks may be stakeholders, may have an interest in the business. The shareholders will certainly have an interest in the business. All of these and more will constitute the stakeholders, anyone who has got an interest in the business. But clearly the employees have, and in this context we're going to focus in on looking at the employees, the employers and the government, because all of those three are major stakeholders in the business. They've all got a big interest in the business. These stakeholders, the employees, the employers and government, they work within an environment which consists of the political framework. The political framework is what covers the country and what gives us laws and regulates the way we live. The economic environment, the forces of the market and the influences on the market. The social, the trends in society, the changes in society. The legal, because when laws are enacted they have to be implemented, and the way they're interpreted and the way they come through to organizations, that's important. And of course technological factors. We live in a period when there seems to be ever increasing changes in terms of technology, the applications of technology, the progress in which technology is making in terms of productivity and changing the way we work. So there are many influences on the environment within which business operates, and we're going to look at, in the context of stakeholders, we're going to look at the employees, the employers and the government, and these will be the three main ones we'll single out in this session. Stakeholders work within an environment to determine a set of rules and guidance within the workplace and to establish best practice. So the stakeholders are constantly trying to improve working conditions, improve relationships within work, trying to gain more productivity, better acceptance of technology and technological change. So there's a whole complex of forces in operation within business at any one time. Forces from the government trying to nudge business in one direction or another, forces from the trade unions trying to get their point across. Perhaps individual employees will come up with ideas and recommendations which need to be taken into account, because perhaps they are very good and innovative suggestions. So there's a very complex world at work, and it's this interplay that needs to be looked at. Employee relations can be seen as a subset of the wider society in which exercises control and constraints within the norms of that society. So employee relations really can be seen as a subset of the norms and culture of the society. What's acceptable in society, the chances are these will be adopted within business. So what are the views of the wider society as enacted in law, perhaps? Their views regarding diversity, regarding discrimination, regarding the treatment of women, regarding working hours or working conditions. What's acceptable within the wider society? Because it's the wider society, that cultural influence, which will determine the more micro influences within the business. So if the society has rules which restrict freedom of certain types of people, the chances are the same types of rules would apply within business. So we can see employee relations as it's a subset, it's a subsystem, as we say here, of the wider society. That doesn't make it right, but it just simply says that if that's what is accepted within the wider society, the chances are it will be accepted within business, within that society. And perhaps that raises a lot of big issues, even in the context of globalization. Should countries be trading with other countries or have close relationships with other countries where perhaps certain peoples are denied rights just simply through discrimination? And if they're denied the rights within that society, the chances are they will be the poorest because they can't gain employment. The environment within which organizations operate has a major impact on industrial relations and employee relations. So the environment of the wider society influences industrial relations if it's within an industrial complex, or employee relations if there's a lot of employment within the service sector as well. So the wider environment influences how business is conducted. That's the point. It's vital that management identify and understand environmental changes and how they will impact on the organisation and their workforce. So having said all of that, it is important for management to understand the relationship between the business and the wider environment, and understand that the wider environment may change for all sorts of reasons. And as the wider environment changes, so also will the business environment within the business. That environment will change as well. Now it may change for the better or for the worse. It depends. Some societies have moved towards a very Western type of democracy and a very Western type of working relationships, and then later on have changed back to more traditional thinking, and industrial relations and employee relations within that society have had to flex accordingly, have to bend accordingly. So let's look at the economic factors. Well, the overall country economic conditions plays a major role. Organisations are directly affected by changing economic conditions. And the economic conditions of the country will be in part a reflection on the resources of the country, including the skill sets of its population, its work ethic, the way it's structured. It'll look at the rates of technical innovation, its track record in exporting, its stability in the currency. It'll affect many aspects of the economic climate, and whatever happens within the wider society, as I said, will have an impact on the business. So if the society is experiencing very high and sustained levels of inflation, that will clearly affect the business. It'll affect the trading relationships, it'll affect the efficiency of the business, because it's got to keep up with the changing currency. It's trying to value its assets and value its sales and operate with a measuring rod, its currency, which is changing all the time. The measuring rod is varying in length, if you like, to use the analogy, and therefore it's difficult for the business to cope with times of rapid inflation. It could be very poor economic performance overseas and the exchange rate is moving in the wrong direction for the company, or it could be the government is facing problems and cutting back on training programs so that the employees will not have the same skill sets that they had before or that were anticipated by management, and this may affect productivity within the business. The wider economic climate has an impact in so many ways. It is so important. High inflation, as I said, has an impact on employee relations. This calls for trade unions to take action against the employee wages and their financial conditions. So when inflation is very high, the salaries of the workers will diminish in value. They can buy less because of high inflation. That will provoke reaction. The trade unions, if unions are involved, will want compensation from the employers. And this will mean that there may be strikes and industrial action. So the economic condition in this case has directly brought about bad employee relations. The level of unemployment impacts on employee relations. Employees and trade unions are concerned with job security. And when people are concerned with job security, they're not so focused perhaps on the day-to-day work. They are more worried about what could happen to them and their families. They will be deprived of an income. So high levels of unemployment may be an issue. Levels of production and GDP impacts the organisation and the amount of trading and level of production. If the economy is booming and there's a high level of gross domestic product, GDP, and GDP is increasing, then people within business will feel optimistic. They will take on more workers, they will expand production, because they will see more sales. More sales because the general public have more disposable income. They can spend more, buy more of the product, so the companies will feel more positive and more optimistic. So if the economies are doing well, then businesses will want to expand, take on more workers, and but of course by taking on more workers there will be even more income, disposable income, in the economy. And that's the basis of what's known as Keynesian economics, and what I've just described there is sometimes described as the multiplier effect. The levels of production and trading will impact on the need to recruit workers. If the needs of an organisation are not met, this will result in redundancies and staff reduction. So the levels of production and trading will impact on the need to recruit. If a company is expanding because it's experiencing high demand for its product, because there's a lot of disposable income in the society, the country is doing well, there's a lot of people working, a lot of income, the company is experiencing good sales, it'll want to take on more workers. If the economy is slowing down and there is less income available to make purchases, then the company will sell less and will therefore look towards making redundancies and making staff reductions. There's the political and legal framework. Political stability is important in order to create a stable industrial relations environment. If the country is going through very turbulent political upheaval, then business may feel threatened, and they may feel that they want to cut back, scale back, and wait for the political storm to blow over, wait for stability to return. But in that period they'll make workers redundant, they'll cut right back. Political stability is important because businesses want to be able to plan into the future. They want to plan with confidence. They want to know if they make investment decisions that they will reap the benefits of those investment decisions. And those investment decisions may stretch into the future. So for example, if a country was about to face some elections and some politicians, let's say from the very left-wing parties, were to come into power and say, if elected, they will increase business tax. They will increase tax on rich people considerably, which is a normal claim by politicians from the left wing in society. If that is the case, then the businesses may think, well, they're not going to invest. But if they don't invest, then of course workers will not get jobs. And the economy will slow down because all businesses will be cutting back. If, on the other hand, politicians from the right in the political spectrum are about to be elected and form the government, then businesses may think, well, these people will cut taxes, will cut business taxes and personal taxes, and will try to promote business, so the climate for business will improve and they will want to expand and take on workers. So clearly the political environment influences businesses. Government policies identify the stability of a country. Trade unions ensure that employees are treated fairly and in accordance to policies and procedures. And of course, employee relations must look at all of this and make recommendations to management as to what the course, in a sense, the proper course of action should be. Proper in the sense of what's likely to happen. So employee relations is dealing with the employees and looking at company policy, but looking at it in the context of the economic, the political and the legal frameworks. There are others, but just looking at it in those contexts for the moment. The impact of legislation on employment, health and safety, global warming have an influence on employment relations and employee rights. So companies sometimes are forced into taking on responsibility for pollution, for example. They may be polluting the atmosphere. Now that pollution is internalized. The business must deal with it, deal with the pollution, must stop polluting the environment because there are health and safety issues, it's causing global warming and so on. But that may mean that employee relations will have to be reconsidered. For example, some employees may be moved from one type of working situation to another. There may be a restructuring of the business which will involve employees, and that needs to be negotiated and explained. And there will be a role for the HRM department in dealing with employee relations to bring about those changes that are required by legislation or by the government that wants the environment tidied up and wants companies to stop polluting. So there could be a restructuring of the business which will have implications for employee rights and employee engagement within the business. Sometimes, I say employee rights, sometimes it may be significant changes to contracts that are required because people were employed on one set of contracts and perhaps those functions are no longer required because those functions were contributing towards the pollution or towards the externalities, the external effects of the business on the wider community around the country. So the employee contracts would have to be looked at as well. So it's complex. The impact of future legislation and changes in policy will directly influence employee relations. The company should really keep an eye on what the government is proposing, what the government is thinking, and try to anticipate what's likely to happen if such proposals were enacted. How would it affect the business? And have contingency plans ready to deal with that should it happen. So it's important that the business is aware of what the government is saying in the context of business and the approach the government is taking towards business. It's important to be well informed. So the HRM department should keep a good eye on the financial press and on the politics of the country to see what the government is saying, see what the opposition are saying as well in Parliament, the various political leaders, their speeches, their ideas, what they're thinking, because it may become policy and it may be enacted in law in the future and will have a direct impact on the business. And that should not come as a surprise to the business. The business should have anticipated, because perhaps politicians were talking about it for a year or 2 years in advance. So there was plenty of warning that it was coming, and businesses should have prepared for the eventuality. Organisations need to follow legal procedures in order to ensure that they are meeting employee rights. So it's important that organisations understand the law, that the HR department should know what the law is regarding employment and employee rights. And they should have good training sessions to enable the employees, the managers and their own staff to know what the law is. This could be not necessarily a training event, but it could be information made available on the intranet, or a pamphlet issued to the employees about certain changes. So the idea is that organisations need to be fully aware of what is required by law and what has been proposed and what's likely to happen in law, and ensure that they are staying within the letter of the law. They should also be staying within the spirit of the law. They should be embracing the law and making sure that they are completely comfortable with the legal requirements, and that they are comfortably addressing all of the legal requirements. The concept of employee relations is dependent on changes in political and legal changes in the country. So employee relations really is a function of the wider political changes and legal changes in the country, and employment must take place within that context. It must address the legal requirements that are imposed on the business. If not, it's open to prosecution. There are social factors. These social factors are embedded into a country and are followed by the community. Social factors can include the culture, the morals, the ethics, the lifestyle of the country. And whatever that environment, that social environment is, that will have an impact on the environment within the business. The dress culture, the religious ideas, the political ideas, the way people live. Whatever the way they live in the wider society, the chances are the business is a microcosm. The business can be seen as a part of that wider society, and the workers or the employees who come in from the wider society will take in with them the culture, the ethics, the lifestyle, and will work in that fashion within the business. So the businesses do not have a separate, generally speaking, cultural framework. The dress code of the wider society will be the dress code of the business, and what's accepted within the wider society will be accepted within business. Social factors impact the way an organisation operates. This is according to the work culture, the norms and the expectations. So whatever the social factors that are in play within the wider society as to what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, these will affect the business. So working hours, having break times during the day, holiday entitlement, pay, training, the type of work that's being performed, the type of products that are being made or proposed. So there are a lot of influences on the business from the wider social environment. Social factors determine the way employee relations are devised. The rules and procedures are determined in accordance to social factors. People are not asked to live differently within the workplace than they are within the wider society. The workplace has certain requirements of the employees in terms of their productivity and the way they work and enable production to take place or enable services to be delivered. But it does not put them in conflict with the wider society. It should not put them in conflict with their beliefs and their norms and the ways of dealing with each other. There are important issues in terms of globalization and dealing with companies in other countries. And sometimes businesses in one country have to have specialist personnel who will deal with their counterparts in other countries because of the influence of different cultural variables on the organization. It could also be the case that different societies have different requirements of the people, and those people will have different requirements therefore of the business. So the way in which businesses grow and develop within certain countries will be different to others. And it may make it difficult to have trading relationships with those societies. But that's the challenge of industrialization, and that's the subject of separate videos. Population demographics and lifestyle changes means that employee relations have to change policies and procedures as people's lifestyles change. Well, people's lifestyles do change over time. It's influenced by music, by fashion, by cultural institutions, by education, by the media, by television, by radio, by films, by travel. People go to other countries and see the way other people live. So there are all sorts of variables that operate on cultures and lead to changing lifestyles. Also demographics, the age structure of the population. Is it a young population or is it an aging population? It'll have different impacts on the type of product and the way employee relations is conducted. Levels of education impact on employee relations. For example, countries such as China and India have massive labour forces and manual workers. Employment contracts and employees' needs will differ. So there is a requirement about education, that education should be, we consider it to be quite liberal and take in all sorts of views and look critically at arguments and points and try to reason logically and gain a greater understanding of different cultures, ways of life, ideas, philosophies and so on. But also education enables people to get gainful employment and to work productively. In some societies there is a large population and it's difficult for the government to supply good training programs and broader education because of the expense and the logistics in doing it. And countries such as China and India have made valiant attempts, have made enormous efforts at trying to develop their educational system and are further developing it all the time to try and meet the requirements of a globalized working environment. But education is one that is one of the variables that will change employee relations significantly. The workforce will know what is acceptable and unacceptable in different countries and in different parts of the country. They will see other sectors introducing new policies and different ways of working, and there will be pressure on employers to conform. So the spread of education is really the spread of ideas. Organisation cultures and people's attitudes to work will create the need for employee relations to meet different needs. So organisation cultures change. They change as the society changes, they change as the product changes, they change as the way in which business is conducted, whether it's globalized or whether it runs on a more domestic level. But organisation culture does emerge and does change over time. So do people's attitudes. We have more exposure to news, global news. We know when there's conflict in the world. We know when there are new ideas. We know when there are new scientific discoveries and innovations and new companies coming into existence. So there's more information floating around now compared to in the past. And this leads to an ever-changing employee relations environment where employees know what's happening elsewhere. They try to agitate to get the same benefits for themselves. So employers are constantly looking out for new cost-saving techniques and new ways of gaining higher productivity, and employees are constantly looking out for better practice and more job security, higher salaries, more job enrichment. It's also technological. Advancements in technology and machinery may be more efficient than human labour. This may impact on employment prospects. Well, we've always worked with technology since the time we lived in caves and hunted for animals. We've used weapons. Cavemen did not go out and wrestle animals with their bare hands, generally speaking. They used a club or they used some piece of rock. So we've always used tools. It seems that we go way back into almost prehistory. But nowadays we use very sophisticated tools. We use computers and networks and all sorts of machinery and automated machinery and machinery which can be programmed and seems to be able to perform many functions almost independent of human intervention. So technology has a major impact on employment. And it's interesting that in other areas on the course, when we discuss productivity, that we think of productivity as labour productivity. But of course, workers work with machines, generally speaking. And it may be that the machine has become more productive, not the worker. So in looking at the output per worker, that statistic may not be accurate. We should perhaps be looking at the output per machine. Now this means that there are issues in employee relations that could lead to conflict. Clearly productivity gains, the employees want to claim those gains for themselves and make a case for more remuneration and better treatment as a consequence of higher productivity. They don't want to suggest to the management that the higher productivity was caused by a better machine that they're now working with. So it can lead to conflict. It can lead to situations where the employees want to make a case to justify themselves, whereas logically it wasn't them. They're doing perhaps the same functions, perhaps even doing less functions, because the machine is now even cleverer. The machine is better designed and has less requirements from humans. So the onset of rapid technological change has major implications for employment. It also emphasizes the need for more education and more training, which is the topic we mentioned earlier. Global communications and the internet has opened many opportunities and threats for organizations. So global communications and the internet means that there is a rapid transfer of ideas from one country to another, from one organization to another. Working practices, best working practices, are communicated very efficiently and very fast between different companies in different countries. So it means that the companies don't have to discover best practice for themselves. Sometimes they're able to pick it off the shelf. They know what is best practice in other countries, and they can apply that. But perhaps the employees don't understand the need for the change or the need for introducing such radical changes in their working practices, and that can lead to conflict. So employee relations is required to smooth that transition from one type of working to a different type of working. Also, efficient transportation and delivery systems means that organizations have an efficient logistical system, and hence eliminating the need for staff. Transportation is a very sophisticated part of many organizations' procedures. It precisely can deliver the product to the customer efficiently, fast, and it's locked in or linked to production. So it's used efficiently. And there are experts in place to ensure that the product is moved efficiently. And that may also put pressure on workers to gain new skills, new training, and to ensure that they are equipped to deal with that new way of working. So there are more pressures on employees again within this type of area of work. So technology has changed dramatically and is continuing to change as new developments and new ways of using technologies are found. It means that the employees require new skill sets. There's more need for education, more need for training, and resistance to change seems to be futile. The pressure for change is global, and if companies do not flex with the requirements of technology and the requirements of efficient production, better quality production, cheaper production, if they don't achieve those companies will fail. The jobs will be lost, the employees will lose their livelihoods. So the onus is on the employees to ensure that they have got the skills and the flexibility to enable the organization to continue. But there is also onus on the HR department to try as far as possible to acquire mechanisms to enable the employees to get those skills. When I say find mechanisms, find training programs, find specific programs that will efficiently give the skills to the employees for them to be more productive, meet the corporate objectives, secure their own employment, and have a better working life experience. So it's important for the HR department to try their best to enable the employees to keep up with the ever-changing requirements of work in the context of wider technological change. So these are some of the environmental impacts on employee relations, and as we can see, they've broadly followed a PEST structure: the political, economic, social, legal and technological structure. So we can put these under a pest heading. If you want to go back over the class and just take a pest piece of paper and a pest set of headings, you can fill out these various points under that structure. But that's all we're going to deal with here. I'm going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.